We had lovely to have you with us this evening, and I must start by saying South Africa, it's complicated.
Very, very. Well, it's complex rather than maybe complicated. I think we've tried best to simplify the story as much as we can. And there's a lot of information there, but hopefully people get the gist of it, and that's what it's about.
I know that there are a number of South Africans that live in New Zealand and other parts of the world. Have you had feedback about the film from those abroad?
Yeah, it's been good. I've done a couple of physical screenings in Europe. South Africans came along and stuff, and I think people were very happy that we were able to make sense of it in 90 minutes. This is perhaps our biggest post-apartheid story, our biggest scandal. The real test of our journalists and indeed our parliament and state.
Did you encounter any opposition at all when you were making the film?
No, but it's always difficult to get the perpetrators to come forward to give their side of the story. We attempted, people can see from the long list of people who refused interviews. These people want to stay out of the limelight, so to speak. A lot of people saying, well, it's still sub judice, there's a commission of inquiry and so on. So often many of our characters wanted to appear before that commission of inquiry before they spoke to us. But
I think
I think the commission of inquiry was useful. We were very skeptical at the beginning, but a lot came out, and it really helped in making of the film.
I think one of the things that struck me quite strongly about the film was just how blatant the corruption has been. Is it only in hindsight that it appears blatant, though?
Well, at the time, from 2011 onwards, really, 2012 in particular, after Jacob Zuma was re-elected, he gets re-elected in 2014, but from 2012 on, we start seeing more and more stories about the Guptas, more and more whispering in the corridors. And there's a sense that they're getting where they are getting through their political connections. So they start, and then when they landed a chartered plane on our Air Force base, full of wedding guests, that was when people really started to take a closer look at them. So no, and then of course the president kept on denying his links and any notion of corruption until we had the proof.
I can only imagine how disappointing all this is for so many South Africans after the pain for decades in the country, theoretically free of apartheid, and then all this corruption comes up. How does this affect people socially and their psyche?
Yeah, I think what was happening was, it felt for a couple of years that it was the wild, wild west. Anything goes. And the level of impunity, it's sort of gone through the roof, so to speak. It was unbelievable to see what was going on, and with no accountability or transparency with the ANC, with the parliament, where the ANC is in a clear majority, refusing to take on the president or his henchmen. That was left for the minority opposition, and 5-6 votes of no confidence. only the last one did we see a few score of ANC MPs vote against the president. So it was very dark days, and I think the level of uncertainty, the fear of massive debt through the nuclear deal, which is back on the table just as of a few days ago. People are using the pandemic to, while Parliament, with no real parliamentary oversight, to push through their own agendas. That's what was happening then, because there was no real parliamentary oversight. So it felt that the country was very, very close to becoming out a full-blown banana republic, so to speak.
So under Cyril Ramaphosa, would you say things are better, or are they different?
Well, if the viewers were watching closely, the audience at home there, you would have seen the results were very close. Ramaphosa just about passed got a sufficient votes to get through, which meant that his top six are comprised of the patronage network, the corrupt network of people around Jacob Zuma. That faction still has a tremendous amount of support inside the ruling party and therefore inside Parliament. And in fact, the person who's in charge of the COVID-19 regulations, the person who opposed Ramaphosa, Jacob Zuma's wife, is in a very powerful position at the moment. So fears are abound that all the money spent on combating the public health crisis, much of this, up to 20 to 30% of the spend that is happening in our hospitals over the last couple of years, is estimated that amount of money, billions, tens of billions of rands, are being siphoned off by this same type of completely unaccountable, greedy political elite.
In the film, I thought that the human rights lawyer, Brian Curran, he made a very interesting observation about the state continuing the same practices of colonisation. Would you agree with that? And how do you decolonise people? Big question.
Yeah, I mean, part of South Africa's strength and weaknesses was the negotiated settlement, the reliance on dialogue, which meant that we had a genuinely peaceful transition. But the trade-off there was that the old homeland leaders from the Bantustans and so on would be incorporated into government, into provincial government, and these gave these old very opportunistic reactionary leaders a foothold into government, and that's where we saw Jacob Zuma's support base in the rural provinces, in particular, giving him the momentum he needed to hold on to power and to ruthlessly exploit it for his interests and those of his coterie. So we have a situation where the transition has a number of fault lines, and meaning that old business is new business. That the more things change, the more things stay the same. But I think now there's tremendous pressure on this government as our health system is falling apart under the pressure of the pandemic, as it's clear that our social security system, our Department of Social Security, is really next to useless, unable to get out the social benefits and so on to people. That the health, as I say, the health system has been completely found wanting in terms of the attempt to test people and trace and track and so on. So I think there's going to be higher levels of accountability and transparency now are being demanded from this government. You can only hope for the best.
Yeah, the phrase capitalism will eat itself sort of sprang to mind for me when I was watching it. Do you think that's kind of what's happening, and something will rise from the ashes, hopefully something better?
Yes, I think that's what's being shown, that lives in all instances in South Africa come secondary to profits. So our minds have been reopened, the bedrock of our economy, the heart of the low-wage economy, the cheap labour economy, to make South Africa a very ruthless place if you don't have money. And it's only 80% of our population don't have money. Live off very little. So this is the nature of capitalism in South Africa. It's concentrated wealth into fewer and fewer hands over the past 25 years. Despite our democratic dispensation, we still have more money in white households than in black households, and we now have extreme levels of inequality within the different racial groups. So, a small, very small black elite, black African elite, the same, the coloured and so-called Indian populations and so on. So this is the problem of capitalism worldwide. It continues to concentrate money into fewer and fewer hands. And with unemployment soaring now, this time, many people are questioning this system and all the qualities that go along with it.
I mean, you can't help, when watching the film, automatically think about other countries in the world. And of course, the US is the first that springs to mind. The demonization of the news media, cronyism, this is happening around the world. So South Africa is not unique in any sense of this.
Very tough place to be a journalist at the moment, the world, where the growth of Facebook and Twitter and all these sites which allow the political elites to set up their own websites, so on, that look like news websites that present themselves as objective when they're thoroughly subjective, and they're fighting back against the work of legacy journalism from the papers that are tried and tested, the news channels which have respect and have integrity. But we now know that 70% of people, certainly in countries around the world which have reasonable levels of internet penetration, the news is now being consumed on these social media platforms. And it's very cheap and easy for these politicians to come back and rubbish and just say anything that's been proven to be fake news. We see that par excellence with Donald Trump, and we've seen South Africa use that same playbook in South Africa.
Well, ironically, we're using that very tool right now for this interview. But Rihad, I've just got a question from one of the viewers who wants to know if the Zuma scandal has really affected the ANC's popularity.
Well, I think it's tainted seriously those people who've been involved with Zuma, who are his frontmen, the ministers and so on. Zuma has lost his number of court cases recently and will hopefully have to face the music when it comes to the courtrooms. But we love a victim in South Africa, and it plays into a psychology out there. We have the support base of the ANC focused, concentrated now in the rural areas and peri-urban areas, and which means that it's here where the population has got less ability to critically engage the news. They have less sources of information and so on, and therefore still remain loyal to the likes of Jacob Zuma. And we haven't been able to completely rubbish this notion of radical economic transformation. Zuma has been using this slogan alongside the ANC, but for their own purposes. So we're seeing still lots of corruption scandals, coming to the fore around the banks and around the tenders for the supplies that are now required for the pandemic. So no, he's still very much a threat. His network is still very much a threat. Politics throughout South Africa and throughout the political parties across South Africa, including the Democratic Alliance, are deeply involved in corrupt activities, particularly at a municipal and local government level. This is how they fund their political parties.
Yeah, and it appears that the wheels of justice move very slowly as well. Are you able to give us a bit of an update on the villains or the alleged villains in the piece, the Guptas, for example? Are they still in Dubai or wherever it was?
They're still in Dubai, and they're married into a very powerful Indian family. The 20 families in India really rule the roost economically, control most of the economy. They're married into one of those families, so they've got some protection from the Indian government. I believe they're still in Dubai with a number of other fugitives from South African justice. We have had the appointment almost a year ago now of Shamila Batory, who's a very highly respected new appointment in the Department of Prosecutions, and she's brought on some significant talent in her various units that are prioritizing this level of corruption. And I think we can expect to see, that they're wanting to make sure that they have all their ducks in the row before they go for the big fish, so to speak, before they lay charges against the authors of these crimes. And I think that's a wise position to take. The question is, how independent are the National Prosecuting Authority? Will they be pressured to hold back from some high-level prosecutions by the political powers, the new political authority in town under Ramaphosa? Because if they do go for these people, it threatens to split the unity of the African National Congress right down the middle. Now, a fractured ruling party won't stand very good chances of getting re-elected in the local elections, which are still scheduled for next year. So this is the question: will the ruling party put the party before the country? And the jury is still out on that. Ramaphosa has been relatively weak-kneed on these issues.
One of the other villains in the piece is the big PR machine that is now connected with many political organisations and politicians. And we've had a question from a viewer who wants to know if you've seen the film Influence. It's part of the festival here. And Tim Pottinger, who was actually in your film with his phone ringing. Have you seen Influence at all?
I have seen Influences, yes. Sorry, what's the question?
She just wanted to know if you'd seen it. I guess she wants to know what you thought of it.
Oh, listen, it's an important film. I think the problem with, I think the film is it tries to cover too much. The whole history of Bell Pottinger. And they have a very scurrilous history. And then you begin, you know, my own view is that we get moved through story, simple storylines, which have complex characters. And the complexity, you can only get the complexity really fully to come out of these characters when you, in a very detailed manner, take us through the stories that they're involved in, rather than the generalities of the case. So, you know, while the film's a stand-up film, we've got to realize the limitations of our genre, but also the strengths of the piece. And that means we need characters who we can identify with and root for or question. So we have we enter into a dialogic relationship with what we're seeing. And that's what makes documentary interesting, is the dialogue that's going on in our heads about what we're seeing. Are they lying? Are they being economical with the truth? Are they bad? Are they good? And so on and so forth. So I don't think, because it was so wide-ranging influencers, the film lost its opportunity to hold us as an audience tightly through that 30-year history or so of Bell Pottinger.
Right, thank you for that. Rihad, we've got a question here from Stu, who wants to know if you know if there are any links between the Guptas and New Zealand or Australia. Did you dig up anything?
I didn't dig up anything, but we do know that there's an Indian outfit in Australia involved in coal, who is attempting to, who we have to be very wary of, and seems to be using the same sort of playbook as the Guptas in Australia. So yeah, no. Other than, I mean, we know that Australia has been the place where a number of the people have fled to over the years. The one that comes into mind is the Sheikh, one of the Sheikh brothers, Chippy, who was involved with the arms deal corruption that took place many years ago in South Africa. He was in the Ministry of Defence and making sure that the contracts went to his brother, or went to a firm that had dealings with his brother. His brother had contracted with a big German-French firm to ensure that they got the contract, and Jacob Zuma was getting kickbacks from that many years ago. And that trial was still, that is going to come to court very shortly, where I think it's 700 separate counts of fraudulent activity. Yeah.
So that'll keep you busy for a while?
Oh no, I'm not. I'm really quite focused on the climate crisis now. The next film's really about the HIV pandemic, which is still very much focused, and a serious problem in South Africa. The fight for the vaccine, and how this is a strong parallels with the COVID pandemic, where it's been a pandemic of fear and blame and panic, and questions of science comes to the fore and so on. So that's the next film. Hopefully Doc Edge will show it.
What year can we expect that one?
Well, that will be out next year, so you'll have it in time for the next festival.
Lovely.
But we're doing a big series on the climate crisis. Obviously, we've been fired up by the massive catastrophes that have been happening in the Amazon and Australia. And now we saw the other day a 38 centigrade temperature in northern Siberia, of all places. Whereas we as a company are going to be focusing our energies with that over the next few years, and can hope to continue that work until the day we die.
Well, fantastic. Hopefully that day is a long way off. Rihad, thank you so much for this evening talking to you. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year.